Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to our panel on climate reporting literacy. This is full house here, so exciting. Thank you, everyone, also for joining online. My name is Lisa Urlbauer. I'm the journalism training coordinator at the Bonn Institute. And I'm going to give the word now to my three panelists to introduce themselves before we start with our questions and some slides for you all.
Hello, hola, thank you for being here. My name is Camille Padilla Dalmau, and I'm the founder of Millones, which that means 9 million in English, because there's 9 million Puerto Ricans around the world. And I'm an educator, I'm a journalist, and I'm an artist. And I'll talk a little more about Millones later.
Hello, everyone. Ekabo. My name is Ruona Meyer, and I'm Africa Initiative Manager at the Solutions Journalism Network. I'm also a researcher. It's just great to be here. Thank you for giving us the privilege of your time.
Hi, I'm Tina Lee. Just echoing, it's really nice to see so many people showing up to be interested in talking to us. We hope we can have some questions at the end and chat. I am the editor-in-chief at Unbias, the news, and head of publications at HostWriter, which is a journalism network that helps journalists to easily collaborate across borders. And our newsroom focuses on covering underreported stories, particularly from journalists that face structural biases. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. So before we dive into the questions, and we want to look at two main things today. We want to talk about what do communities need from our reporting in the climate crisis. And we also want to talk about the skill sets that journalists need for that. And before that, I am going to set the scene a bit and give you a quick overview of what actually is constructive journalism. Because constructive journalism, the tenets of it, are going to inform what we're talking about today. And the three elements of constructive journalism that set the scene are the focus on solutions, also called solutions journalism. It's the focus on multiple perspectives so that we have different voices and different views in our reporting and show the different challenges that people have, and especially when we cover issues like the climate crisis that go beyond borders, we need to have different voices in our reporting. And the last element of constructive journalism that is important is the issue of constructive dialogues. How do we foster healthier debates in our society and our reporting, and how do we interact with our communities? So these are the three elements of constructive journalism. And now I'm happy to start with the first question, asking Camille, because constructive journalism is about placing the needs of the people we are reporting for at the heart of our reporting. And what is it that communities want to know about the climate crisis in your communities?
Yeah. So the first slide here, we see a bee, right? And I really love to learn from nature. And I like to think of journalists as pollinators, right? And that information can help people advocate for the society that they want to see. Before we start, I want to put Puerto Rico on the map. That's the reason I came all the way to Perugia. Puerto Rico is an archipelago in the Caribbean, so you can see right there where we are. And you can go to the next slide. One thing that I want to talk about is what do the communities want to know? Well, in Puerto Rico, we are living the effects of the climate crisis. There are rising tides. We have stronger and more frequent hurricanes. And we also are seeing more droughts, right? So people already are living the problem. So when you're living the problem, really what you want to know is, well, how are you part of the solution? And today I'm going to share about two tools that I think can help in constructive climate crisis. One is answering the question, what actions can I take? And service journalism is a way that we can help people orient them of what actions they can take. And the other is then how we can make systemic changes, because it's really important that we don't focus all our reporting in the individual, but what are the systems in place that are degenerating our planet, right? So, and that's when solutions journalism gets into the mix. So first, I will talk about service journalism and an example that we did. This is a type of quick turnaround that you can make, and the example today is where to recycle alkaline batteries in Puerto Rico. So alkaline batteries, when they get to landfills, they exert a lot of chemicals that are very dangerous. In Puerto Rico, we don't have the proper liners so they can actually absorb that. So it's very important that we are mindful. We did this story, and it's been the most popular story of last year. And this kind of service journalism is very good for SEO because it's very searchable. People still search for this type of thing because they want to know, right? And it's also evergreen. And one of the ways that I know I measure the impact is because I've received calls and people are like, how can I open it, have a center that receives batteries in my town? As you can see what we did, we created a map with the towns that have these centers. And what I say to them is like, well, I'm not the organization that plans this, but I'll connect you to them, right? But that means to me that the article is inspiring people to take action, right? And I'm showing different ways that this other reel over here is more of a video that we did about what you can and you can't recycle in Puerto Rico. And I wanted to show how we use visuals to make the stories more accessible. And we talk about the problem of landfills in the story, but we also give people a way to act. Then I'm going to get into the second. When we talk about solutions journalism, I wanted to focus on finding regenerative solutions, right? So as I mentioned, we live in a system that is degenerating the Earth's resources. Regenerative solutions are those that are not only sustainable, but are actually nurturing the Earth, right? The first example here is a story. Oh, can you go back? I'm sorry. A story about how a community is responding to the landfill crisis in Puerto Rico. And you can see here's Ana Arache. I worked on the story for a full year, so these stories tend to take more time. It's almost like a slow journalism, because if you want to really see the evidence of how a solution works, for me it's very important to see how it works during a period of time. That's what's going to make me see how it actually works. And what happened when I first went there, she had compost, right, that she created from the debris of Hurricane Maria in 2017. So 4 years later, they still had that compost, and it was a very unique thing. Most of the vegetative debris in Puerto Rico went to the landfills, and as I say, we have a landfill crisis. Like, it's really, at some point, we don't know what we're going to do with all the trash that we're producing. So this is a very important story, and I also made a video for our social media. Again, it's like we have this long story, but how can we make it accessible? And this story, we partnered with GRIS to publish it also in their publication, and we got financing from an organization. So I feel like these solution stories, there are people out there that want to finance this type of story. The second one is about how scientists, you can go to the next slide, how scientists are responding to the spreading of a rapidly spreading disease in corals. And again, we talked to a local scientist, Fabiola, who is administering this antibiotic to help the corals, but it's not a perfect solution, and we mentioned that in the story, right? Because we don't really know what effect does that antibiotic have in the coral. So I also want to mention that there are no perfect solutions, and you really want to show the limitations, and that's what makes this rigorous reporting, right? This is also a story that took a long time, and I think with both of these stories, this one was cross-pollinated, partnered with Earth Island Journal, and this one we crowdfunded for the story. So we actually we have a crowdfunding platform in our website, and we received the help from people before we actually started reporting. And I think the other impact that I see from these stories is that when we receive letters where people tell us that these stories make them feel hopeful. And that's something that is important to us. That is like, Puerto Rico is not only defined by our problems, but by how we respond to them. So, and later I can talk a little bit of how now we're being a little more proactive with our community engagement even before we write stories. And I just wanted to point out these beautiful illustrations that we use for the story by Alexander Lebron. In the top you see a healthy coral, in the bottom an unhealthy coral. And again, how can we use audiovisual elements to really have people connect with the earth?
Thank you, Camille, for bringing us here to Puerto Rico with your answers. And Ruona, you're working with newsrooms and journalists, and you train them. What are the skill sets journalists need to better address the climate crisis in their reporting?
Let me start a bit from my own type of Puerto Rico, so to speak. So at the Solutions Journalism Network, we train with climate change. We noticed we first of all had demand from individuals. So we were training individuals. This is over a 2.5-year period. Then we saw that demand started coming from newsrooms. Then we saw that actual training, journalism training organizations are now the ones that are seeking constructive solutions-focused climate change reporting skills. So this is the trend we're seeing. It's becoming more institutionalized, which is a good thing because, as Camille has pointed out already, it needs to be institutionalized for you to have measurable and quick effects on the newsroom, on the news product, and on people. So I'll go to the next slide. What is shifting? We're starting to see that coming from the training side, it's often been about the global north narrative of here's mitigation, here's adaptation, and there's a little R word, resilience. But we've started seeing a change in these narratives. Journalists want to actually know more about reporting climate from the climate justice lens. They want to, first of all, start with climate literacy. They want to know the basics. They want to know how to report with a climate justice lens. Then they also want to know how to investigate climate solutions that are popping up. Therefore, the skill a journalist needs to have is you need to understand what climate is. How do we start the basic literacy set? We start with the difference between climate and weather. It might look simple, but not knowing the difference between climate and weather is actually why opponents criticize and discredit journalistic reporting on climate change. Because when someone reports on something that is the weather and calls it climate, then they are like, see, you don't even know your facts correctly, and it all goes downhill. That journalist suffers, the newsroom suffers, trust is lost. We also are trying, with literacy, we're also looking at literacy that keeps up with the terms that are coming up. Before, carbon markets were not really a thing in Africa, but now Africa has a climate change carbon markets initiative, which was signed at COP27. What that means is the lingo, the training, the literacy has to match what is going on. We can't say we're not going to understand what eco anxiety means either, because we see it happening in our communities as well. So journalists have to know all these terms. When it comes to climate justice, you tend to see that a lot of the solutions, yes, they want to regenerate whole swathes of land, they want to do this and that, but often it's at the expense of indigenous communities. And so journalists are realizing there is actually a climate justice element, and they want to understand. So our training will always factor in how to report from a climate justice lens. That would be you are investigating the solutions and you're looking at how unjust some of these solutions can be. We also look at, everyone's running around climate change. Oh, let's do something. Black money is in climate change right now. Black money is already entering climate change solutions. Dirty money is being laundered through the system. So we also try to allow journalists understand that as an investigative journalist, you also have to investigate who is bringing in the money for the solutions. What are it's business. Bad business will always go where money is, and right now there's money in climate solutions. So we try to make sure that our journalists in the global south understand these changes. Literacy also, we tend to get heavy, and this was not actually based directly on demand. But you know how you do a training and people ask questions, and then you realize, hang on, we have to really now be intentional. What we started introducing was the place of culture in climate literacy. Now, you can be literate in climate change as a journalist, but if you go out and you interview somebody who believes that the drought is caused by evil spirits, you have to understand how to really talk to that person. You have to talk to them in a way that does not influence your story as well. And you have to make sure, because constructive journalism is also in the production of your story, you have to be constructive. You have to do no harm. But how do you engage with somebody who believes that the drought is caused by evil spirits? There's a special way. So we teach these types of techniques. We also know that climate change, cultural knowledge is affecting journalism as well. Some newsrooms, they don't see the need for, oh, this climate story again. You know, they want to take a weather approach. Meanwhile, it's a climate approach. So, and then when you have a newsroom, for example, where the management is older, culture comes in. So we're trying to look at literacy in terms of culture as well, so that constructive solutions journalism is successful when the journalist gets to the newsroom. So this is what is shifting as we train. We are not just looking at mitigation, adaptation. No, we're actually trying to make sure we adapt the training to the realities on ground. So this is one example we just did with London-based Center for Investigative Journalism. They wanted to train, I think, about 40 journalists in Francophone West Africa. So we had English training. They're one of the institutionalized partnerships where we do the curriculum, then they take it, we train their trainers, and the trainers go off and add their elements. So this was in French and English. And one of the main slide we had here that resonated when we got feedback was they actually did not realize before that mitigation and adaptation fits in with climate justice. I will say one thing that journalists should realize if you report on the global south is the fact that there is climate injustice. We do not cause most of the greenhouse and carbon effects that are going on, but we suffer it the most. We also, some of our heads of states have complained at COP, for example, that funding is being removed for mitigation and all of that. So what happens when a typical African government does not have enough funding? They're still going to steal more. And what then happens to the people? More poverty. So climate justice is an increasing trend, and it's important that that angle is reported if you're talking about solutions. And the fund and funding mechanisms are also important. So away from the money, how the money passes through from donor to policy and to the solution also needs to be explained, because a lot of people do not understand all this carbon market chain. They don't know what it is, how it works, so they cannot investigate it. Next slide. So using a solutions approach actually resonated with the journalists. The trainer said some journalists raised the issue of solutions journalism regarding the challenges they have. So a lot of NGOs are working in Africa. And they are like, come and report my shit. Oh, sorry, are we meant to swear? They're like, come and report about me. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But because they now know how to use the guides, the pillars of solutions journalism, they are now quite critical. Yes, I will consider you as a source. I will report on this, but this, and this is necessary for me to understand what is going on. So we are seeing that climate literacy is important to actually have critical reporting, because we can't run away from the NGOs, especially in the global south. They are the ones that are doing most of the work. They are the ones supporting the individuals in doing the work. But how do we engage with them critically so that we are not reinforcing information asymmetries? People are telling us that solutions journalism is helping them do that. And this final slide is from a trainee. And they said, I thought the SoJo was more complicated than this and far from me. But now I realize it is much easier than I thought. On a daily basis, I report on social problems. And I think the SoJo approach can help me better report on social problems. And this is the thing with climate literacy, climate media literacy. It is not about running away from the problems. In fact, we insist you must report and stay on the problems. But you must report a full story. It's not enough to say, hey, this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is a problem. It's important to say this is why the problem is happening, this is what you can do about it, or this is a solution that should have done this. We have investigated and found out it's actually doing that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm open to more questions, but these are the trends we're noticing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruona. So the climate crisis is one of the issues, probably it's that issue that's not stopping at our borders. So I want to ask you, Tina, how can cross-border reporting strengthen the coverage of the climate crisis?
Great, thanks. So what you see here is our latest big cross-border project, the Sinking Cities Project, which you can find at Unbias the News /Sinking Cities. And, unbiasednews.org/Sinking Cities. And just to give you some kind of concept of how we arrived at doing something like this, which was a large-scale multi-country investigation into how cities are responding to rising tides and diminishing coastlines, is that our whole kind of concept at Host Writer and Unbiased the News is that people need to collaborate across borders, people need to have more diversity in their newsroom, not because that's more fair or that's friendly or whatever, but because when you don't have adequate diversity, when you're not talking to the right groups of people, then you're missing something in your reporting. You're not doing good reporting if part of the population is not being talked to. And the genesis of this project is kind of an example of how we work, which is that we're sitting in our newsroom with colleagues from Egypt, like Wafa Al-Badri, who's here in the crowd today, and Nigeria and Pakistan and the United States, and going, wow, we all have something in common, which is that a major, huge city in our countries are about to sink into the ocean, and it doesn't seem like they're doing anything to stop it, that there's not any money being sent to prevent it. But actually what is happening is there's a huge amount of money built to build new buildings. And why is that? And what's happening with that? And we thought we should do something about this, actually. We should try to investigate it. But what we also noticed, a trend that we don't like, basically, is that large, really well-funded newsrooms go to places after disasters have taken place and kind of helicopter over and show the scale of the disaster, right? And yet, a lot of times, like in the United States with Hurricane Katrina, for example, people have been saying for years that this kind of thing can happen, this kind of thing might happen. But there's not that kind of in-depth reporting that happens beforehand about what's at risk and who is doing anything to stop it, or what kind of barriers there are to getting something stopped. And I think that that is a virtue of the fact also that you have these large organizations that fly to another country and show it. Do the people in those countries actually read it then afterwards, or does the person in the country that's doing the reporting actually read it? And if you fly to another country to report on it, are you going to be as good at pinpointing the dynamics, the people responsible, the individual stakeholders and power holders in your community? So our idea was, let's have local journalists from the cities report on these topics. We're going to build their capacity to do heavy-duty climate change reporting by having trainings. We had one with the Solutions Journalism Network. We had some expertise also from people we had met at Perugia who were giving kind of backgrounds into ICCP reports and everything. And we wanted these journalists to have the chance to not only report on their community from the local expertise that they had, but also have all this kind of cross-border knowledge at their disposal by collaborating in a team and getting support from us as editors, but also supporting each other to see the kind of dynamics. I think you can go to the next slide. The result is that we had these 6 pieces from different countries. They're really in-depth. I used the example here of Lagos by Ope Adetayo, who is a really great up-and-coming Nigerian journalist who's from Lagos. And while he was reporting on this, he realized something, which is that the city of Lagos is basically selling out the parts of its wetlands, which are not protected by any convention. Even though Nigeria is a member of a Wetlands Protection Convention, the Lagos wetlands are not protected, also something we found out through this story. And he showed this because we commissioned satellite data to actually do it. The government wouldn't allow us to see their satellite data, or if they have collected it, they wouldn't tell us. We filed FOIA requests. So we actually showed, I think it's on the next slide, how you could see year by year how communities were getting washed away, and that you can tie this directly to the fact that they're developing with major developments like eco and some other big like hotels and centers where people will go to entertain themselves. They're selling off wetlands that are this major protective barrier for the city. And we saw this over and over again in every country that we went to, that if there were looks into what the environmental impact of major real estate actions would be, that they were ignored, or they didn't do them at all, or they weren't acknowledged in the final action. And you have to remember that people are desperate for the jobs and money and everything that these kinds of projects bring. But at the same time, there's really big backlash in the communities that are getting washed over. In the photograph you see above, in 2018, there were still houses there. So these communities are literally being washed away to make room for major real estate infrastructure that maybe doesn't last for the next 10 or 20 years because of where it's being built. I think you can go to the next slide. We also saw then in these cities how this is sparking political movements, like in Karachi, where people who started to get active because their homes were being destroyed to make space for kind of drainage outlets that were not well thought out, had nothing to do with where the drainage actually needed to happen. The people whose homes were sacrificed while huge real estate developments were being built where you actually would need the drainage, got radicalized by this activity and became just climate activists more generally, where they had started advocating for their homes. So I don't know if I still have one more slide, but I think my point is that when we had local journalists actually doing this kind of reporting that happens before tragedy strikes, reporting that actually points fingers at local actors, then what you can see, and if you visit, you can check out the other cities. We also looked at Rotterdam and Dublin and Dhaka. What you can see is that there is, first of all, global pattern going on of people's needs and adaptation being kind of subjugated to the needs of real estate development, capital, and political needs. But also what you can see is that far from just being natural events, that there are really political and economic and social choices that go into how we respond to climate change. I think that the actors who are best positioned to recognize this kind of developments are local journalists, and that what we would really like to see at Unbias the News, but also I think everyone here probably shares the same view, is that if you're going to have a diverse ecosystem with lots of cross-pollination, that you have to add capacity so that we don't have the same kind of homogenous reporting and the same kind of actors doing reporting. We need those guys too. We need everyone in the field, but we also need there to be a lot more activity from the Global South, from local journalists. The capacity needs to be built for them to do this kind of reporting as well. And while I would say that our reporting is not exclusively about solutions, if you do look at structures and you dig deeper into kind of context and local history about things, you often do find structures that offer a pathway towards solutions. And we're really privileged to be able to give the time and effort to be able to do that in this project. I hope we'll be able to do other projects like that as well.
I wanted to respond real quick to things that you both said. For us in Puerto Rico, it's really important to contextualize the climate crises in colonialism, right? Because as a colony of the United States, there are bureaucratic structures in place that make it hard for these community solutions that I talked about to actually get the funding to scale those solutions. And as Ruona said, like the Caribbean is one of the regions that least emits CO2 emissions, but it's one of the most affected, right? And these are things that need to be talked about because this is a global problem that needs global solutions. So I really appreciate both of your presentations.
Thanks to all of you. So I have a quick round of more questions, and then we would already stop because we want to give some time for questions from the audience. So, Ruona, I would like to know can you tell us some of the hurdles that you have seen in working with newsrooms when covering the climate crisis with the solutions angles, and do you have some tips on how to overcome them?
So the main hurdle we have is that a lot of the material globally on climate change, on climate literacy, is in English. When you do have a training that's not in English, because we work in languages like Swahili, you do that language in French, Francophone French, you even get a trainer who speaks the dialect and all of that. When it's time for more resources, voila, English. So it's a big problem. If there are people in this room who can diversify the pool, please go ahead. That would really help. Another problem remains culture. And for me, I think it's the disregard of culture that happens in training. I think the worst thing you can do is disregard somebody's upbringing when you're trying to educate them or collaborate with them. And that hurdle needs to change just simply by even going on Twitter or watching an IJF panel online and say, okay, what do I need to do? Tweet and say, what do I need to understand if I want to train people or work with people on so and so? The training or the capacity has to be relevant and has to understand and respect the culture. You cannot dismiss a colleague who actually says, I'm scared to go and report on what is happening in the beach communities because they might use voodoo on me. You can't discredit that just because you don't understand what voodoo is. So I feel these two hurdles are very powerful because people will not be open to the training if, one, they cannot access it fully in their language. The training will also not land, or the practices will not land if it comes from a place of not being cognizant of the culture and how to inculcate that into training. So as I said, when we start training, we are also like, well, you might run into somebody who says this, climate change is caused by witches. This is what you should do. This is how you should approach it, acknowledge them and all of that. So I think if we start on those two parts, it would be good.
Thank you. Camille, you already hinted at that, but how do you work together with your communities in really gauging what they want to hear from you as reporters?
Yeah, so I think in the first 2 years that we were reporting, we're reporting very intuitively, and in a sense, people resonated with them, but now we're being more structured about how we engage communities. And actually, we're thinking about which communities within the archipelago of Puerto Rico are less reported on, and which ones the reporting tends to be more shallow, and we're going to those communities. We're identifying community journalists, because a beautiful thing that has happened is that a lot of communities, since they don't see themselves reflected in media, they're taking it upon themselves to tell their stories. And so we have received some tools, and we're doing what you're saying is how can we create these tools that we've received, can we make them culturally relevant, offer them in the language, and then also hire people from those communities that they are the editors of their stories, right? Not just hire them as fixers, because that's one of the big issues that we face. People want to come to our countries, they want to hire us as fixers and not give us proper credit, not give us actual power over our stories. So we are looking at that even within our own islands, like where does that happen, and trying to decentralize a little of the reporting so we can really reclaim our stories.
Thank you. So to give proper time for questions from the audience, I would just like to ask you all for one take-home message for the audience on climate reporting literacy, starting with you, Tina.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just emphasize that for us, what's really important is that people get to report on their own cities. That local journalism really has a chance to be part of the climate reporting landscape. And that we, I think, saw from the COVID pandemic how damaging it is when you have a homogenous group of scientists and a homogenous group of reporters reporting on something, how many stories were missed and how many people's lives were at stake because of the lack of diversity in the journalism field. And it's something we all need to learn from, that we don't make the same mistake in the climate crisis.
My takeaway is climate media literacy needs to be at all levels. For journalists, training should be cognizant of the inequalities and the asymmetries in education. Training should diversify because it actually covers media freedom. When a journalist goes into the field and does not report with enough literacy, they become, they are open to danger, online abuse, actual abuse. So we should treat it with as much seriousness as we treat other things. And we should put more funding into the investigation of climate solutions because they are proliferating right now.
If you're a journalist that wants to report on the climate, I invite you to first connect with yourself, because the root of the problem here is that we're disconnected from the world, that we're in disharmony, right? And so it starts with self-reflection. Like, even the fact, I know that I burned a lot of fossil fuels getting here, so I'm reflecting on that. But I know that it is also powerful to connect with people around the world. And just take time to connect with the land where you inhabit. If it's not the land of your ancestors, connect with the indigenous people and know their traditions and honor those traditions. Because if we honor ourselves and we become healthier ourselves, then when we go to the communities and we talk to them, they will feel that and they will feel honored as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. So there's still some time left for questions. So many hands. There are 2 microphones. Let's start in the back. And it would be great if you could say your name. And if you have like a question that's addressing one panelist in particular, just, say that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Denise Ruby. I'm a climate journalist. And I was wondering, I understand that in each story you address the problems that come with the solution. But I was wondering how, if you look at your entire body of work, how you avoid that body of work giving people a false sense of hope. And also, if you consider and how you address not shifting the responsibility of policymakers and industry leaders to individuals. And I think the story is for Camille, the question is for Camille and Ruona, maybe?
What was the last part? I didn't hear it well.
How you avoid shifting responsibility from policymakers and industry leaders to individuals.
There's a word that I didn't understand.
Like individual people, like not to blame the responsibility on people.
Yeah, that's so important. So the first thing in terms of when we talk, we always contextualize the problems. What is the root of the problem before talking about the solution? And it's always showing the evidence of how far that solution can go, but also the limitations. Like I say, it's very important to see how, if that solution is actually addressing the root problem, or is it actually perpetuating the problem, because that can happen as well. And I believe that by having that balance, because people do want to make better choices, but by also reporting on those stories that contextualize the root problems, you're also giving them tools so they can advocate for policy that can change the structural system. I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah? Okay.
Who else? Yeah, just, you got the mic already. I didn't see that. Should I?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lebogang. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa, currently based in Berlin. I'm a researcher. Well, I think a broader sort of understanding I've picked up from the conversation is aspects of representation and misrepresentation in media broadly. And I was wondering, actually, because there are bigger, like, newsrooms here, what sort of advice you'd give, because this taps into issues of ethics and code of, conducts in editorials, and we haven't really tapped into that strongly. How would you advise newsrooms to really deconstruct their ethics? Because right now we're actually talking about this conversation of climate change from a more like sort of Western understanding of it. And so, yeah, that's one of my aspects. And perhaps Tina could also bring forward, how Unbiased the News has sort of brought in a very interesting ethics in your newsroom. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Let's connect back in Berlin. I didn't realize there were some other Berliners here. On our website at unbiasedthenews.org, you can see our editorial manifesto that we wrote collectively based on also this 2019 book we wrote, Unbiased the News, Why Diversity Matters for Journalism. So the concept was we asked people from all over the world to submit what are the barriers to more diversity in journalism, and then we basically backtracked and did a code of ethics based on that. How would you actually deconstruct your newsroom to make it, to get rid of these kind of barriers? And one of the things that we believe is, first of all, that it's really crucial to acknowledge your own bias. So that's why we're called Unbiased the News. We think that the two big biases in the media are that, first of all, people pretend to be unbiased, and that's as if that's possible. And second of all, that people don't, that there's not enough diversity in newsrooms to really call yourself biased. White men, for example, are not de facto more biased than other groups of people, but if you have a whole group full of just white men, then yes, that is going to be a bias, right? So when there's a lack of diversity in a newsroom, when it's more homogenous, that creates a bias as well. So we think one thing that would be really important, and I think it's already been kind of raised here, and it's obvious sort of already from the topic of this conversation, is stop flying your journalists from the United States to countries all over the world to do the reporting. Hire the journalists that are already there, build their capacity, trust them to tell the stories from their own communities. That also goes into, instead of going there expecting that you're going to understand the context of it by hiring a fixer, who often gets paid less, doesn't get a byline, and you don't actually listen to that much. Maybe that fixer could be the journalist that you can hire that can do the story and get paid the same. So there are other big things. Pay people enough that it's actually equal. That's the other big problem with big newsrooms, is that there seems to be some real inside-outside action on payment. And yeah, listen to smaller independent outlets that have new ideas for how to do this kind of reporting, and listen to solutions journalism. Don't always make the flashiest thing after the fact, but look at the structural things before. I think we have good examples here that that big newsrooms would be well to listen to. Thanks.
I just wanted to add, it's not totally correct to say that we are discussing climate change from a Western perspective. Very far from it. As I said, the Western world is talking about mitigation, adaptation, resilience. We're talking about culture. And we're doing it in Anglophone French. We're not even doing it in French. We're doing it in Anglophone French. There's a difference. We're doing it in Swahili. We're doing it in Pidgin English. So for me, I think what newsrooms should take out of here, bigger newsrooms, is try and find out what's really going on, and efforts of people like Camille, for example, can be scaled and replicated. The types of training we give can always be something you can discuss, especially if you have a big cohort of journalists that are in the Global South. I don't think we tap into the types of training. In big newsrooms will often train the journalists that are in the headquarters, the capitals, the big cities. I will say if you have people that are elsewhere, also tap into training them this way in a local context.
Yeah, right now we're actually, thanks to the support of the Solutions Journalism Network and the Climate Vegan Program, we're creating models that can be replicated. So if that's something that interests you, come here, I'll give you my contact. But I would also say in terms of ethics, my ethics are, our newsroom ethics are, we think about how does this story affect the mental health of the people that are reading it or viewing it. And if it's causing anxiety and if it's causing depression, I don't think it serves my communities. So what we're measuring is constructive hope, not just toxic hope. It's not about bypassing the problems, but actually accepting the problem, seeing what the structural issues are, and then what are the solutions that can actually address that. And I'm going to quote Jaime Abello, which is the director of Fundación Gabo in Colombia. In my first Train the Trainer, he said, journalists have the responsibility to not make society lose the hope that things can get better.
Hi. My name is Daiva, and this question is inspired by a conversation I had today about some media that most of us probably don't really read, but since events like this are about collaboration, I wonder, so to get climate coverage or climate change coverage to more communities, would you or your organization collaborate with the newsrooms that are known to have caused a lot of damage to our communities, perhaps in one or another way? So, I mean, tabloids, the kinds of the I don't know if I can name names, but I think everybody everybody knows what they are in each country. The tabloids that have stigmatized our communities, but at the same time, they reach communities that maybe we don't reach with our reporting. So for the sake of getting everyone on board to understand climate change, would you collaborate with any of them? Thank you.
Oh, that's a long sigh.
I do think it is important that mainstream news starts doing this type of story. I think it really depends on who I'm collaborating with. And I think the first thing I would do, and this is what I do also with the communities that we do outreach with, we set intentions first and we put clearly what our values are. And if you don't align with our values, then there's a misalignment. We cannot work together. But if our values align, I believe that there are great reporters in these more mainstream organizations and great editors that would like to do this type of work. I'd like to think that they're there. And yeah, so I think it's very important to have those conversations before. So if your values are aligned, then yes, we can work together.
At SJN, we are the concept of the village shrine or the church. All are welcome. You know, we take that constructive approach not to judge you by your terrible past.
Yeah, right?
Come and be washed clean. Basically, we don't say, oh, because somebody reported it. If not, where is the change going to happen? So from a training perspective, we will welcome all, have a discussion and say, okay, these are the areas where you need to. And that's how we operate. We feel, let's at least try. And if they don't take the chance after that, then do you, sis?
Yeah, I would also say one of the things that we do at Unbias the News is we have basically a kind of open platform. You can republish our articles for free as long as you mention and link somewhere to Unbias the News. So that means that we're kind of agnostic. We want to reach as many people as possible. We want to amplify the perspectives of the people in the stories. So I would be totally open to republication. And Axel Springer, reach out. We're just here waiting for you.
So we have time for one more question.
There's a question there.
Perfect. And everybody else, feel free to connect with the panelists afterwards. So here's the last question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is for you, Camille. My name is Vanessa. I report from Abuja, Nigeria. Two things. You do crowdfunding. I'm not sure who you're sourcing funding from and how that influences your journalism and if you're absolutely independent. Yeah. The second thing is, as a journalist, when you're reporting these things that directly affect communities and people, do you see a borderline, a thin line, where you're becoming an advocate, so you're stepping out of your journalism role into advocacy, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for those questions. The first one is we have our own crowdfunding platform. Most are small donations from our audience, a lot of our donations come from Puerto Ricans that live outside of Puerto Rico. Actually, 63% of Puerto Ricans live outside of Puerto Rico. I used to live outside of Puerto Rico. I know the nostalgia and the desire to help the archipelago when you live far away. So we're tapping into them, but also there's allies. A lot of people in the United States see the injustices that happen in Puerto Rico and want to support this type of reporting. With the advocacy question, what I say is that we have an editorial perspective that we're very clear on. We have an editorial perspective that we are pro-human rights and pro-environment, and we're clear about what that perspective But we do our due diligence with making sure that everything, the facts are right, and also being fair, I think, is always important. Giving people the chance to respond when someone's, accusing them. And I actually feel like in some instances where, for example, in the landfill story, the municipality and the federal government made this story possible. They actually, it was a public-private partnership, right? And it's very rare that we speak of the things that work in government. In that case, we did, because they gave the space so Anna could do that, right? But yeah, I just feel like it's about being clear about your editorial perspective and being fair with the reporting.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please connect afterwards with our panelists, and thank you for coming and joining us.